sure this group is really familiar with those concepts and reasons for wanting to protect our natural resources and our water resources. So this is just a short list. These are just a few things that I put together. I'm sure there's many more. Why is it important to protect our watersheds and our local waterways? Well, an easy one is water supply. Certainly, in our area, the Guadalupe River, Canyon Lake is, the primary water source for our area, at least in New Braunfels. So we get approximately 80% of our water from the Guadalupe River and Canyon Lake. And then, lesser percentages from the Edwards Aquifer and the Trinity Aquifer, and just for New Braunfels. If you're in the surrounding areas, your source of water may be a little different from that, but in New Braunfels, that's the main water supply. So, certainly the water that's pulled from the river is treated before use and distribution, but, it's important to protect the water quality for water supply, and that, it cost can go up if you were talking about, treatment cost for poor water quality. So important to protect water, our water supply. Water-based recreation, certainly folks here are familiar with, recreation on our local rivers. I will admit at times it can get a little over the top and crazy. But then again, there's a lot of opportunities in our area for not only tubing, but also kayaking, fishing, and those type of activities, swimming. And so that's definitely a reason to protect water quality, to protect the safety of not only swimmers and recreationalists, but also the aquatic species that live within our waterways. Quality of life for future generations. I went ahead and included a picture of me. So this picture right here is me when I was maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years old. So right there, I'm on the Guadalupe River at Nichols Landing near the Spring Branch Bridge. I kind of grew up in that area, running around, fishing, keeping my toes muddy, catching crawfish. So that was something that was real important to me growing up. And it's certainly, a life awakening that kind of set the stage for the rest of my life. Being around the Guadalupe River, really appreciating our waterways was very important to me, to my life in general. Right next to me is a picture of my daughter in a tube on the San Marcos River. So I threw these pictures up there just because I'm kind of, I've got a daughter now. And so I'm now not just looking at the next 20 or 30 years that I have on this planet to enjoy our natural resources, but also looking at, 80 years ahead now on making sure that my daughter has the access to our local waterways and wanting to maintain our waterways for her enjoyment and for future generations, even beyond that. Also our aquatic ecosystems. Our area is home to endangered species, and not only endangered species, but just native species that are important to our water resources and to our area in general. Certainly fishing is a very popular activity here in Central Texas, and so protecting our aquatic ecosystems to ensure our fisheries are healthy and our aquatic ecosystems are healthy. And then I just threw out this last one, Central Texas culture. I think everyone would probably agree, if you grew up in this area or lived in this area long enough, that the rivers are just an important part of what ties our area together, and I believe it has been since people first started settling here and settled by our waterways for drinking water supply and the opportunities that, rivers and springs offered to the early settlers of this area. I think it still is an important part of Central Texas culture. So again, these are just some quick, easy things I threw up there on why it's important to me to protect our watersheds and our waterways. With that said, I'd like to just kind of go into a couple different programs that we have going on at the City of New Braunfels that deal with watershed management and water quality protection. The first of these is the MS4 Stormwater Management Program. A second program I'll discuss is the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan. And the third is the Watershed Protection Plan for the Dry Comal Creek and Comal River. And then after that, I'll go into a couple other ancillary efforts that we have going on that kind of supplement these other programs. With that, I'll go into the MS4 Stormwater Management Program. The MS4 program, as I'll refer to it, it's basically a mandated program. It's required by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Essentially the MS4 system, it's just a fancy or long word for saying the city's storm drain system. So this is all the storm drain ditches, pipes, channels, and even streets within the city of New Braunfels that collect and convey stormwater to our local waterways. And so as the city of New Braunfels exceeded 50,000 in population, which, believe it or not, was in 2014, we had a population of about 60,000. Now I think we're closer to 90,000. So there's a lot of growth there. So anyhow, when we exceeded that 50,000 population mark, we were required to adhere to some of these MS4 requirements that are under the TCEQ's MS4 permit. So really the purpose of this program and this permit is basically to protect or prevent or minimize stormwater pollution and to protect water quality. So certainly as cities grow in size, there's more and more pressure on our water resources as a result of, activity and urban development. So this program is intended to help mitigate, urbanization. So to meet our MS4 program requirements and to help protect water quality, we've developed a stormwater management plan, which includes several different focus areas. One is public education, outreach, and involvement. The second is illicit discharge detection and elimination. We also have a construction stormwater management program, post-construction stormwater management program, and a pollution prevention program for municipal operations. And I'll go in to provide a couple of examples of each of these. So public outreach and involvement, this is something that we put a lot of focus and effort into. So this includes a wide variety of activities. An easy one that we do a lot of, not so much these days, but before COVID, is we were pretty active in the local schools, both Comal Independent School District and New Braunfels Independent School District, on going to classrooms and teaching kids about, a lot of the same information that I'm talking to you about, why it's important to protect water quality, what are the sources of drinking water, what is an ecosystem, So we go and talk to kids about these watershed protection elements to inform them of why it's important to protect our water resources. And hopefully through those activities we are raising awareness of our kids and our next generation to kind of lead the charge in water quality protection. We also have some other public involvement programs. One is an Adopt a Spot river cleanup program. So this program is similar to the TxDOT Adopt a Highway program, where a group or organization can adopt a spot within an area along a creek or river in New Braunfels and kind of sponsor that spot to hold quarterly cleanups. So we have a good amount of participation in this program. We also have an annual watershed cleanup program, which we call the Dos Rios Watershed Cleanup. This year was our 4th annual Dos Rios Watershed Cleanup, and this is just an event where we invite volunteers to kind of help clean up our local waterways, and we hold this in the fall of every year. Each year we get about 200 folks out, and we collect about a ton of trash from our local waterways. So in the 4 years we've been holding this event, we've got a lot of momentum, and we hope to grow this event every year to have more participation and more trash ultimately picked up from our local waterways. And then here's just a picture of some folks. You can tell this picture was taken during this year's event because everybody has masks on, but folks are out there, and we're kind of help facilitating folks to do some cleanup activities in and around town. Another program that we administer is an illicit discharge detection and elimination program. So this basically involves the city, my staff, and other staff within the city responding to any pollution concerns that are phoned into the city. It also involves us going out and screening stormwater outfalls along our creeks and rivers to make sure that there's not pollutants discharging from our storm drain system out into our local waterways. And so we actively screen these stormwater outfalls once a year. These pictures right here are stock photos, so I'm not wanting to cause or raise any alarm with our stormwater here in New Braunfels. So these aren't actual photos here. So we also have a construction stormwater management program. Certainly, there's a lot of construction and a lot of development going on in New Braunfels, and as land is cleared for construction and they remove vegetation and trees, there's a great potential for erosion and as a result sedimentation in our local waterways. So we do have a program in place to actively inspect construction sites to make sure that they have proper erosion controls up and are following good pollution prevention practices on construction sites. We also have a program and some relatively new requirements of the city for how we are going to address stormwater management in areas of new development. So again, our area is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. Every year, I think we get a report that says we are ranked among the top 5 or 10 fastest growing cities in the United States. So certainly there is a lot of conversion of farmland or rangeland, pervious cover that is getting transformed into impervious cover. And certainly that has an impact on water quality and receiving waterways. So we do have some new requirements that require new developments that add over 5,000 square feet of impervious cover. They're required to treat the first ½ inch of runoff from that new impervious cover. And then once I guess in a lot of the developers, they're using either green stormwater infrastructure or standard, water quality treatment facilities, sand filters and the like, extended detention to treat that stormwater runoff from the new impervious cover. And then the city staff goes out and inspects those new water quality treatment facilities to make sure that they're operational and being properly maintained. So aside from this requirement here, the city's there's a few other, development regulations that are out there right now that are being proposed that are out for stakeholder input that involve adding stream buffer requirements for new developments that would require, essentially stream setbacks from any creek or waterway. And then also some new floodplain regulations that would kind of limit development within the floodplain. So those are out for stakeholder comment right now, and they'll be going to city council in the next few months for consideration and hopefully adoption. The next program that I want to talk a little bit about is the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan. So the HCP, as I'm going to refer to it, is a regional program. The HCP includes both spring flow and habitat protection measures. These measures are implemented not just by City of New Braunfels, but San Antonio Water Systems, Edwards Aquifer Authority, City of San Marcos, and Texas State University. So this program is all about protecting the endangered species that live in both the Comal Springs, Comal River System and the San Marcos River System. So this program is essentially a result of the failure to adequately protect those endangered species and the threat of overpumping of the Edwards Aquifer basically minimize or draw down spring flow in the Comal and San Marcos River systems, which those endangered species rely on. So this program, it's funded by aquifer management fees that are assessed to municipal and industrial Edwards Aquifer permit holders. So for instance, some of our bigger Edwards Aquifer permit holders are municipalities. Certainly San Antonio Water System has about half, if not a little more, of the overall amount of Edwards Aquifer withdrawal permits. But certainly, City of San Marcos, City of New Braunfels are large permit holders, not anywhere on the tune of the amount of permits that San Antonio Water Systems has. And then you have quarries and other industrial users within the Edwards Aquifer region that basically through their permits they are paying into this program to help protect the endangered species. So the City of New Braunfels' primary role is to implement habitat restoration measures within the Comal River system. And I'll get into some examples of these different restoration activities that we implement to protect the endangered species in the Comal River system. So these measures include riparian and stream bank restoration, aquatic plant restoration, invasive species removal, and then also water quality management and planning. So real quick on the HCP spring flow protection measures, going back to the 50s, I think it was about 52 to 58. I may be a little off on those years, but during the mid 50s is what we refer to as the drought of record, when the Comal springs basically ceased to flow for 6 months. So as a result of that, going forward, and then also seeing, of course, the spring flow returned when the rains returned, but with that drought occurring, and then also as our region expanded and there was more pressure on Edwards Aquifer water, there was alarm within the environmental community, and the Sierra Club filed a lawsuit against the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for failure to adequately protect those endangered species at Comal Springs. So as a result of that lawsuit, basically a stakeholder group was required to get together to develop this habitat conservation plan to adequately protect the species. So the HCP establishes spring flow targets for Comal Springs with a minimum spring flow of 30 CFS and then a long-term average of 225 CFS for the Comal Springs. And those spring flow protection measures include a VISPO program, which is a voluntary irrigation suspension program, which basically the program pays farmers that are largely in Uvalde and Medina County to not pump their water during times of drought. So there's farmers out in Uvalde, Medina counties, and well, throughout the counties within the Edwards Aquifer region, but basically there's farmers on standby to basically, when we go in and hit certain triggers, when spring flow starts dropping and Edwards Aquifer levels start dropping, those farmers are paid to basically not pump their Edwards Aquifer water, which in turn leaves water in the Edwards Aquifer to issue out at Comal Springs and the San Marcos Springs. There's also a regional conservation program, which is largely realized in San Antonio Water Systems leak detection program, where they're going out and looking for leaks within their water distribution system and repairing those leaks, which ultimately results in a savings of water, and less water leaking from their system means less water that they ultimately have to withdraw from the Edwards Aquifer for water supply. Another big spring flow protection measure is the SAWS aquifer storage and recovery. And some of y'all may be familiar with the aquifer storage and recovery concept. Definitely New Braunfels Utilities here is exploring an ASR program here. But basically what that's all about is San Antonio Water Systems, in times when Edwards Aquifer levels are high and spring flow at Comal Springs and San Marcos Springs is high, they pump water out of the Edwards and they store that in the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer, which is kind of a sand aquifer. And that water that they pump in stays in place in the Carrizo Aquifer. So when we do get into times of drought, they can use and pump water from that the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer and that aquifer storage in that aquifer, and pump from that aquifer as opposed to pumping from the Edwards Aquifer, again, which leaves water in the ground so it can supply flow to Comal Springs and San Marcos Springs. And then the HCP also includes the stage 5 pumping reduction. So all of you are probably familiar with the staged water restrictions. So the staged water restrictions are basically applied to the municipality or the permit holder, but those staged restrictions usually get passed down to the end user. So if you're being told we're in stage 2 and you cannot water your yard, or you can only water your grass once or twice a week, that's basically because the municipality or your water provider is required to cut their water usage and their pumpage from the Edwards Aquifer by a certain percentage. So the stage 5 is a 44% reduction on the entire allotment that's available through a permit. So that's a big cutback. So if we're talking about, San Antonio Water Systems, who has over 300,000 acre feet of permitted water, they're basically cutting their water supply from the Edwards almost in half. And that's for the sole benefit of providing spring flow to Comal and San Marcos Springs. So a lot of folks ask, what is the benefits of the HCP program to New Braunfels? Well, one is it provides the city protection of lawsuits under the Endangered Species Act for take of endangered species. So what I mean by take is any harm or harassment or damage of the actual endangered species that live within the Comal River system. So certainly nobody is going out there. Well, I hope nobody is going out and actively trying to catch fountain darters or endangered species and harm them. But certainly as folks are doing river recreation, tubing on the Comal River, and the city has city parks that facilitate that river recreation and access to the Comal River. As folks are recreating in the river, there is potential to harm endangered species habitat in the river. And so the HCP covers essentially the city from that otherwise lawful activity of allowing river recreation. The city also uses some water from the Comal River for irrigation of the city golf course. So it allows us to continue with that activity. And we also have, the Land O'Lake paddle boats and spring-fed pool, which we allow public access to. So it allows us to continue that activity. So another big benefit to New Braunfels, and probably the biggest benefit, in my opinion, is that it provides spring flow at Comal Springs during extended drought. I mentioned that 30 CFS minimum spring flow level. So while it's not a whole lot of water issuing from Comal Springs, it does keep the springs flowing during extended drought, which would essentially be the repeat of the drought of record. So if we got into that same scenario of extended drought that was similar to the drought of the 50s when Comal Springs went dry, under those same conditions, it ensures that we do have at least some water flowing from the Comal Springs, which is intended primarily through the program for endangered species, but it also continues to provide water for recreation and to keep the river flowing. And last but certainly not least is the program provides a lot of funding to the city to implement these restoration measures on the Comal River system, which otherwise we probably wouldn't be able to afford, or get funds allocated through the city to do this restoration. So there's a lot of good restoration work that I'm going to talk about that is paid for through funds through the program. So I'll go through and just list some examples of these HCP habitat protection measures. We do a lot of aquatic plant restoration, non-native species control, stream bank restoration, and then also water quality management. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these. So aquatic plant restoration, the fountain darter, it's a small minnow that lives in Land O'Lake in the Comal River system and also in the San Marcos River system. It prefers native aquatic vegetation for its habitat. So all the photos I have up here are of native aquatic vegetation. So we have a program in place where we remove non-native vegetation from the Comal River system, from Land O'Lake all the way down, through the river system, and we replace that non-native vegetation and encourage the expansion of native aquatic plant species, which provide more suitable or better habitat for the fountain darter. So you can kind of see through these photos what that entails is basically propagating and planting these native plant species within the Comal River system. We also do a lot of riparian restoration. Here's a big project that we did along the old channel of the Comal River system, which was actually the original channel of the Comal River, which is honestly, it's a lot of folks are unaware that this was the original channel of the Comal River. When people think of the Comal River, they generally think of Inman Island Park, Prince Salms Park, Worsfest area. So really, that's all considered the new channel. And so the old channel of the Comal River winds through the Comal Springs or the Land O'Lake Golf Course. But anyhow, we did a large bank stabilization project along the old channel. You can see the photo up here on the top left. Was a photo of an eroding cut bank. You see elephant ears, a lot of non-native, primarily non-native, ligustrum and Chinese tallow, Chinaberry trees. And there was even a big island in the middle of the river, which was, a result of a part of this slope slumping off and depositing in the river. So we basically did a project to stabilize that bank and revegetate it. So these photos here kind of just show the progression of the project for pre-existing conditions to basically in the bottom right corner, a close to finished project. And this photo here shows the project about a year after completion. So we had a nice variety of native grasses and plant species filling in this area, and again, just helping to stabilize and hold this bank together. We also do a lot of non-native animal and fish removal. So certainly, back in the day, at some point, there was introductions of non-native animal species. The species that we target are sailfin catfish. So when I talk about the sailfin catfish, I'm essentially talking about a plecostomus, which is, that sucker fish that lives in your aquarium that you see on the side of the fish tank, sucking algae off your fish tank. So at some point in time, this guy got released, and due to the relatively stable thermal conditions of the Comal River system, and what I mean by that is due to the spring flow into the system in the Comal Springs, the water stays about 72 degrees year round. So at those temperatures, species that typically thrived, like the sailfin catfish is from South America, the tilapia is from Africa, but those fish species that typically would have died off, you put these species in the, let's say in Canyon Lake, for instance, it would get cold in the winter and those species would die off. But since the Comal River system stays about 72 degrees throughout the year, these species are able to thrive year round. So we have a program in place to remove those plecostomus or sailfin catfish, to remove tilapia and also nutria. And so you can see here kind of the efforts that have been put forward through the years and what I believe is an impressive number of non-natives. The overall intent of this program, again, is to limit competition of the non-natives with the native species and the endangered species, and then also some of the habitat degradation that some of these species impart on the Comal River system. The tilapia, they kick up a lot of non-native or native aquatic vegetation for spawning beds. The nutria and the sailfin catfish burrow into the banks and kind of cause some bank stabilization or destabilization. Kind of going forward, riparian restoration examples. So some of you folks may be familiar with this. This image here, this location, this is within the gazebo circle area of Landa Park. This is Spring Run 3 of the Comal River system. And so you can see over time, we had basically the Spring Run, which there's several different endangered species within the Spring Run here. And we basically had a walk path along the river that was, denuded of vegetation. Every time it rained, we would see evidence of erosion off of this area and deposition into the Spring Run. So we took on a project to basically establish a riparian buffer along that Spring Run to kind of give it some protection against erosion and sedimentation. So you can kind of just see a couple pictures, from the pre-existing condition prior to the project to what the project looks like now. Or I think these pictures were taken, roughly about a year ago. So again, just trying to establish that riparian buffer that helps to protect that Spring Run. Another example of riparian restoration, we have a few areas in Landa Park where that were right along the lake that were devoid of any kind of vegetation, and that's a result of pedestrian traffic and visitor traffic that denuded the vegetation, but also, certainly white-tailed deer populations and waterfowl populations did not help the vegetation out in these areas. So we basically did some native plant and grass restoration to establish vegetation in these areas where we saw erosion and we saw sedimentation in the lake that resulted from erosion of these stream bank areas. But we've done also a lot of stream bank or riparian restoration along the old channel. So if those of you who are familiar with the old channel of the Comal River, and maybe you play golf on the golf course, so you may be familiar with the old channel, but we've done a lot of riparian restoration along the old channel. Unfortunately, over time, there had been a proliferation of non-native invasive vegetation along the old channel to where it was primarily, I would say 80 to 90% of non-native vegetation, primarily elephant ear, ligustrum, Chinese tallow, China berry. So we took on a program to basically remove all those non-native species and then come back in, set up erosion control berms where we remove those non-natives and then plant native species to kind of get this native plant species back and established within the system. We've taken kind of some of the same riparian restoration measures, not just in the old channel, but also around Land O'Lake. And then also we're starting in the upper spring run of Land O'Lake. So here's just a map of the upper part of Land O'Lake. You can see on the kind of upper right portion of the photo, you can see the headwaters facility, headwaters at the Comal, which has undergone a massive transformation and restoration effort there. So we're kind of working from that area back down into Land O'Lake, where we're doing the same kind of efforts with removal of non-native species and planting of native plant species. Through the HCP, we're also doing a lot with water quality management. So our main focus with the funds that we have available for this program is to implement green stormwater infrastructure, or LID, stormwater treatment measures that are close to the system to treat stormwater runoff prior to it discharging to Land O'Lake and the Comal River system. So typically stormwater runs from our storm drain system in New Braunfels or from a local street. It typically runs right to our waterways with little to zero treatment, typically zero treatment of stormwater before it reaches our waterways. So this is an effort to put in bioretention units, you can see in this picture here, or other LID measures to basically capture that stormwater runoff and infiltrate it and filter it before it is discharged to the river system. So right now, we've completed one project, which is at the end of North Houston Avenue in the Upper Spring Run area of Land O'Lake. We have a project that's under construction now at the headwaters at the Comal Center. And then we have two more projects that are coming in down closer to Landa Park. One's the Aquatic Center parking lot at Landa Park, and the other is right next to the Wurstfest grounds adjacent to Landa Park. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the watershed protection plan for Dry Comal Creek and Comal River. I'll start with the basis of why we're doing a watershed protection plan, and then also some of the issues that we're seeing that led us to kind of develop this protection plan. So as part of the Clean Rivers program, the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, they monitor a number of sites, not just in New Braunfels, but throughout the Guadalupe River system. So they monitor these sites and take water quality samples, send them to the lab for analysis. Most sites are done on a monthly basis, some are done on a quarterly basis, but they basically take these samples and they compare the samples. Sometimes it's single samples, sometimes it's long-term data sets, but they compare these to the state water quality standards. So Texas has surface water quality standards that are required to be met. And so basically every 2 years, GBRA consolidates all the data that they collect, report that to the state, and figure out which waterways are not meeting the state recreational standards. So in New Braunfels, there's 4 monitoring sites. One on the Dry Comal Creek, which is on the Dry Comal Creek near the Knights of Columbus. It's right before the Dry Comal Creek discharges into or joins up with the Comal River. And that's the only official monitoring station for the Dry Comal Creek. There's 2 monthly stations that GBRA monitors for on the Comal River. One is just downstream of Land O'Lake before the confluence with the Dry Comal Creek, and one is down at Hinman Island Park. And then we have one monitoring station on the Guadalupe River at Cypress Bend Park. And so again, these are the monitoring locations in New Braunfels, but as you move up the river, there's a number of sites at the different crossings, downstream of Canyon Lake, and even monitoring sites in Canyon Lake, and then also upstream of Canyon Lake to the headwaters. So unfortunately, with the data that GBRA has been collecting, and they've been doing this data collection since the late 90s, we have seen some water quality impairments, which essentially means that that water body is not meeting the state standard for a given parameter. In our case, it's for bacteria. And so the state has a standard of 126 MPN, which is the unit of measurement for bacteria within recreational waterways. So unfortunately, the Dry Comal Creek has failed to meet that state standard for bacteria since 2010. The Comal River has more recently been placed on that, what's called the 303D list of impaired water bodies. It was placed on that list in 2016 and has been on that list ever since. Just to explain and provide a little information on the graph here that you're seeing, each of these data points that's listed for each year here or every other year, each of these data points, this isn't just a single sample that has gone out and collected and taken to the lab. Each data point here represents monthly samples over the last 7 years. So any given data point, like for instance, the data points here from 2020, that basically represents, what is it, 84 samples from the prior 7 years. And actually it's 9 years, because if we look at 2020 data point, let's take for instance the Comal River data point that says 162. That was data that was collected between was it 2011 and 2018. So there's a long term of when that data is collected and analyzed and reported. So not just a instantaneous sample, but a long-term data set that's applied against that state standard. So again, you can see here for yourselves that there's been increases, over the last 15 or 20 years on both water bodies. And that's where we're at now. And this is really the basis of why we're doing these watershed protection plan to address these water quality impairments. All right, bear with me just 1 second here. All right, I minimized all of y'all's faces, and I got a little lonely for a second there. I thought I was presenting to myself, so I have you back now. So I have my audience back. So certainly when we came abreast that there was a bacteria impairment, naturally the first thing you want to ask is, well, what's the source of the bacteria? How is this bacteria getting in our waterways? What is the source of it? So we took advantage of kind of the best available science and technology and worked with Texas A&M laboratory to do what's called a bacteria source tracking analysis. And so basically what that is it's analysis that use DNA, basically where they can take a water sample, take that back to the lab and determine what the source of the bacteria was when those samples were collected. So you can see here in these pie charts what the sources were that we found. And again, we did this sampling in both 2013 and 2016. So we wanted to not just do this one time and forget it, but we wanted to do it a couple times to ensure that the data in 1 year where data was collected, that it wasn't just a representation of that snapshot in time. So we did this 2 times, and both of those times came back with a large percentage of the bacteria being from wildlife sources. So you can see in the pie charts here, 60 to 70% from wildlife sources, with much lesser inputs from livestock, pets, and human sources. So these results weighed heavily in the management measures that we put forth in the watershed protection plan to try to address these sources of bacteria. And so with that information, we worked with a large group of stakeholders and technical advisors. Stakeholders included GBRA, New Braunfels Utilities, Comal County, Texas Parks and Wildlife, river outfitters, environmental interests, Texas A&M. We had a large suite of stakeholders and then technical advisors as well to help us develop a watershed protection plan that was aimed at basically reducing bacteria loading to Comal River and Dry Comal Creek to try to meet those state standards for bacteria. So we've developed that plan. That plan has been blessed or approved by both TCEQ and the US EPA. And what basically that means when it's been accepted or approved by those agencies is it kind of gives you a leg up on getting grant funding to kind of help support or implement your program or your watershed protection plan. So We received funding in 2018 from TCEQ and EPA to the tune of about $450,000 to begin implementation of the Watershed Protection Plan. And more recently, within the last couple months, we were awarded close to $1 million to continue implementation of our Watershed Protection Plan. So we essentially have funding to continue implementation of the WPP, as I'm going to refer to it, at least through 2025, which the WPP itself was the schedule or the calendar, the implementation schedule is over a 10-year period. So it's thought that over that 10-year period, we should be able to achieve those state water quality goals. So here's just a snapshot of what was included in the Watershed Protection Plan. So again, with a high percentage of the bacteria in the waterway coming from wildlife based on the BST or bacterial source tracking, we focused a lot of effort and included a lot of measures in the WPP to address wildlife in our area. So certainly in Landa Park and areas of New Braunfels, we have what I consider overabundant urban wildlife and a proliferation of white-tailed deer and non-native waterfowl, specifically in Landa Park, but all throughout the city, to where we visibly saw a lot of waste and excrement from those species that was deposited on the banks of the river and essentially being washed into the river. So we focused a lot of measures on urban wildlife, and I'll talk about a few of those. We also have urban stormwater management measures, which include pet waste BMPs. These are fairly straightforward on providing pet waste stations to folks and educational materials to folks on why it's important to pick up after your pet. In this next round of grant funding, we'll be implementing stormwater treatment BMPs. I mentioned kind of some examples of what those are with our HCP program overview. The WPP also includes a livestock management, primarily out in the rural areas of the dry Comal Creek watershed. So the WPP includes these measures to basically work with private landowners on things that they can do, basically keeping their cattle from basically, stomping in the creek, going to the bathroom, defecating directly in the creek, setting up fences or water troughs throughout their property to kind of minimize, livestock from reaching the waterway and excreting down by the waterways. So that's included in the plan. So far, we have not worked or received any grant funding to implement livestock measures. We also have measures in the WPP regarding septic systems. There's certainly, I forget the exact number, so don't quote me, but it was approximately 2,000 septic systems, which were throughout the dry Comal Creek watershed. And so the WPP includes, an accelerated inspection program to basically go out and inspect septic systems throughout the watershed to make sure that they are not failing and are operating properly, and could even include funds to replace failing septic systems. And then certainly a lot of education outreach. There's a lot of effort to reach out to the community on this WPP and inform people of things that they can do to kind of help minimize bacteria loading. I think we're kind of getting short on time, so I'm going to blow through a few of these implementation measures. But please feel free at the end to ask questions if I breeze through anything. But one thing that the city took on, and the New Braunfels City Council had passed a wildlife feeding ordinance, which prohibits feeding of wildlife within New Braunfels. And so this was an attempt to basically help disperse white-tailed deer and duck and geese populations in the city. Certainly, on private property throughout the city, there's a lot of feeding of white-tailed deer. And then in Landa Park itself, feeding has gone on. I think when I was a kid, I was out there with my folks or grandfolks feeding ducks and geese. And so over time, there has been just a huge abundance of waterfowl around Land Lake. I'd say 80 to 90% of those waterfowl around Land Lake are non-native species, waterfowl species. So we have this ordinance in place, and so we're seeing some improvement with or reductions in feeding around the city and within our parks. So we've taken a lot of effort to install signage and inform folks about the ordinance. A lot of these signs you'll see in Landa Park, but also have these throughout the watershed areas. We're also actively trapping non-native waterfowl within Land Park. So we're primarily trapping Egyptian geese and Muscovy ducks, but also other domesticated ducks in Land Park. So you can see here in this picture what I'm talking about. You can see direct, defecation along the waterways by these waterfowl. Again, when it rains, this gets washed right into the river. So our trapping program is aimed at reducing the overabundance of wildlife or waterfowl in Land Park. And we've worked very closely with Texas Parks and Wildlife and work with a professional trapper to do this program. We also oil coat non-native waterfowl eggs in Land Park. So this basically helps us reduce new populations of non-native waterfowl. And then we also do a lot of education, to folks about the negative impacts of wildlife feeding. I talked a little bit about pet waste management, but we basically have been working with our city's parks department, with local HOAs, and then multifamily or apartment units within the watershed areas to provide pet waste dispensers for those parks or those multifamily units. And so we've purchased these and provided these for folks. And it also have installed pet waste signage in different areas, city parks, and then also out throughout the community. As with our MS4 program, we're also doing a lot of education outreach. Before COVID, we were doing a lot of in-class presentations, for elementary, middle school, and high school kids within our area. We were going to education outreach events. That is definitely slowed down with COVID, but we've also looked for other opportunities to do education outreach and inform folks about the WPP program. One thing that we're doing right now, which has allowed us to reach folks in light of COVID, is we have produced an educational video, which you can find on the city's Watershed or WPP website. And I have a link for that I'll show in a minute. But basically, it's a great video that we've put into a couple movie theaters and that we've put out on social media so that folks can kind of learn about what they can do to kind of help out the cause and minimizing bacteria pollution to the Comal River and Dry Comal Creek. The city's also partnering with Texas Parks and Wildlife as part of their Healthy Creeks initiative to combat arundo cane. So this is arundo donax. I think it's called Siniso cane. I've seen a few other names for it, but this arundo cane can really cause problems and choke out waterways in our area. And certainly along the Comal River, Dry Comal Creek, and Guadalupe River, we have seen the proliferation of this arundo cane along the banks of the river. And so we've taken advantage of this program and partnered with Parks and Wildlife to help treat some of this arundo cane in areas that we've identified it within the city limits. And certainly that program extends beyond the city limits, and they're doing non-native or arundo cane treatment throughout other rivers in creeks in the central Texas area. Last but not least, this is not an effort that I'm as closely involved with. This is more within the city parks department, but certainly the development of the Dry Comal Creek Greenway is important. And I thought it'd be important to mention to this group with y'all's mission and goals. But the city worked with stakeholders and the public, and then also got a grant through the National Park Service to develop this conceptual trail system along the Dry Comal Creek, basically extending from approximately the Works Fest grounds and then extending out even just beyond the city limits on the Dry Comal Creek. So that resulted in the development of a Dry Comal Creek Greenway Master Plan. Again, there's been some challenges. There's a lot of private property ownership along the Dry Comal Creek as you kind of extend outside of the city limits. And so this is essentially a potential avenue for the city to look for conservation opportunities to develop the trail, but also conservation of any property. As you all likely know, it has a flood protection benefit. It also has a water quality benefit. So I'm certainly involved on that level on trying to push for conservation of properties to kind of help protect species in our water resources in New Braunfels. So I'm looking for grant fundings and other funding opportunities or partnerships, basically to help, purchase conservation areas. There's certainly some federal Section 6 grants out there that are aimed at, helping to protect endangered species. So with endangered species in Comal River system, we can seek out these grant opportunities. And that's all I'll say about the Greenbelt development. If you do have more questions or want to get some more information, you can contact Ilda within our Parks and Recreation Department. I just wanted to throw out a few resources here. You can find a lot of this information I talked about in more detail on the city's Watershed webpage, Watershed Management webpage. Here's the address here. The GBRA Clean Rivers Program, the address is here, but there's a lot of information. There's all the data that water quality data that GBRA collects is on that page, as well as some nice highlight reports where they kind of summarize all the water quality conditions throughout the Guadalupe River Basin. So this is a great resource. There's the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan website through the Edwards Aquifer Authority webpage. So if you want to learn more about that program, you can seek it out there. And then also the webpage for the Dry Comal Creek and Comal River Watershed Protection Plan program that I talked about. So certainly I graced on that, but if you want to find some more information, you can follow this web link here. And with that, I know I kind of ran us out of time, but certainly if there's time for questions or discussion, I'd like to hear from you all. So again, thank you for allowing me to speak about these programs. I have a lot of I take a lot of pride in these programs that we're implementing, but certainly, we have a long way to go with kind of trying to protect our water resources. So again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing you and hearing from you.
Thank you, Mark. That was excellent. That was very informative. Does anybody have questions? I've seen a couple come on the chat. Here's one. Oh, somebody asked about why we coat eggs, and Philip has answered, coating the eggs of non-native. Oops, it went away. Philip, you want to?
Yeah, I will. And that may have been Philip Quast who was trying to answer. He's my counterpart, our watershed coordinator at the city. But if you go, and we work really closely with Texas Parks and Wildlife, but if you go to I guess what they call a clutch of waterfowl eggs, and if you go and basically just say crush those or take those away, those waterfowl are more apt to just go and lay another clutch of eggs. So by oil coating, you basically kill the egg and the developing duck, but the waterfowl think that that's still a viable clutch, and they will tend those eggs and not freely kind of lay more eggs. So that's kind of the reason we oil coat as opposed to destroying or smashing the eggs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jency Madden had a question about septic system inspections. She was wondering if the inspections are going on now, or if this is something planned for the future. Do we have an answer for that, Mark?
It's a measure. I think it's an important one. Certainly I mentioned that number of septic systems that are out in the Dry Comal Creek watershed and the rural portions, upwards of 2,000 septic systems. I'd like to think that septic systems that are kept in good order are not releasing bacteria and pollutants, but certainly septic systems that are not being maintained and septic systems that are maybe closer to the actual creek may be discharging bacteria or other pollutants. So there's certainly a concern there. And we did include that inspection program in the watershed protection plan. That's out of the city's jurisdiction, and certainly Comal County, they're kind of the licensed agent in Comal County that oversees the septic system program on behalf of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So it would essentially be within their court to implement that inspection system or program. And if they wish to do so, they could potentially apply for grant funding through this program to supplement or help fund that type of program. So on that end, I'd encourage folks, if you have similar concern, you can reach out to your county commissioner and make sure they're aware of this program, and that make sure that they know it's important to you and important to water quality, and hopefully there you could get a little bit of traction on getting a program like this implemented.
Thank you. And there was another one that came in that asked, where could we get a copy of the MS4? Is that on one of the websites that you put up there?
Yes, ma'am. It is. It's on that let's see, I scroll back to it real quick here. So this www.nbtexas.org/watershed. If you go to that page, you will see on the left a tab for the MS4 program. And there you can kind of see a summary of our activities, but also get a copy of our stormwater management plan and our annual reports that we submit to TCEQ as part of that program.
Okay.
And certainly if folks can't find any of this information, or you just want to call and ask about it, or give me an email, my information's here as well, if that's easier for you.
Anybody have another question?
I see one from Jack. He typed it in the chat, but go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, so there are quite a few of us that live outside of the city of New Braunfels in what we call the Wild Wild West, which happens to be the headwaters of the dry Comal Creek. And you showed that the E. coli pollution's still increasing in 2020, which really doesn't come as much of a surprise because we have a big deer population and our human population, including myself, is increasing. And so there is a dirty little secret. In 2009, the TCEQ allowed for the self-maintenance of on-site septic or sewage systems. And I'm finding out that my neighbors move in and don't know what a septic system is, and they do nothing until there's a problem. So my question is, who outside of the city of New Braunfels is responsible for the watershed in Comal County?
Certainly there's some onus on individuals, to maintain their systems. And I agree. I have neighbors that know nothing about septic systems and have done nothing. My neighbor, he's lived in his house for 20 years. And just the other day, he told me, I didn't know you had to do anything to your septic systems. And only when it causes you a problem and it backs up into your house or you smell something, do folks do anything. So certainly there's some onus on individuals. The county is TCEQ's agent for issuing permits, and I believe they're required to respond to complaints about septic systems. So if a neighbor calls, if you call on your neighbor and call Comal County, I believe they're required to go out there and investigate and determine if there is a functioning septic system. I'd say between those two, I don't know if TCEQ, I doubt that they have any plans to tighten the ratchets on their septic system program. So I would say between individual awareness and the county would be where that lies. I do know that the county does have an educational program. I think twice a year they offer septic system courses, maintenance courses for residents. That's something that we are trying to promote and advertise on the city level and through the city's WPP website. So certainly that's a resource that could be publicized even more or through word of mouth spread so folks can kind of learn a little bit about what it takes to maintain a septic system.
Okay. Could I ask another question?
Please.
So just outside the city limits, there's a long row of quarries that are mining the dry Comal flood plain watershed. Are you seeing any evidence of any of this sediment coming down into the city?
I'd say no. I haven't seen any direct evidence or water quality data that shows high TSS or TDS. With watershed management, it's definitely challenging to pinpoint any one source or contributor. I mean, y'all know how it is around here. When it rains, it pours. You get large storms and you definitely have a lot of water moving from a lot of places, and it's hard to pinpoint where that source might be coming from, whether it's, sediment or whether it's bacteria or any other pollutant. I haven't seen any evidence from those quarries. Certainly those quarries have industrial stormwater discharge permits through the TCEQ, and they are required to have stormwater management plan and have measures in place to, minimize discharges of pollutant from their facilities. As far as TCEQ oversight of those facilities, I don't know at what level TCEQ is inspecting those facilities. But certainly I'd hope that they have type programs in place. And I do know some of the folks at those quarries, and they're good folks. And I'd like to think that they are taking steps to kind of prevent pollutant discharges from their facilities.
Any other questions?
Yes. How much on-site monitoring does the TCEQ do of your WPP program? Do they actively check on things, or they just pretty much accept your reports?
Let's see. I guess so the Watershed Protection Plan, we seek out grant funding through TCEQ voluntarily, and all the measures that we implement, they're all voluntary.
Okay.
So with that said, when we receive grant funding, there is, they do want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the dollars that are being provided to us. And we take pride in making sure that we're spending those dollars wisely. So they do oversee that portion to make sure we're implementing the programs that we said we're going to implement, and make sure we're sticking to our grant contract and making sure that those funds are being used wisely. So that's kind of how it works with that program. And certainly, the folks at TCEQ, our project manager, is involved, and we're in close contact with those folks.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
Raise your hand or talk.
Okay, so when you were talking earlier about these septic systems, were you really talking about septic systems, or did you mean aerobic systems?
Yeah, I was kind of talking about both of those. The aerobic systems, from what I understand is that there's a better treatment there, and you're treating, the septic system, the water, and you're spraying that on the land surface, and then you have, potential for plants to kind of absorb any, potential pollutants that are being sprayed out. So from what I understand, if those aerobic systems are being maintained, they're superior to your standard, underground anaerobic septic system. But I would say with failure to maintain either one of those systems, you could, be discharging pollutants or bacteria from a septic system. So yeah, I just kind of lump those in together.
Okay, well, Comal County has a class program where you can actually be certified on your aerobic system and maintain it so that it works the way it's supposed to. And that's actually not a bad program. I wish, though, at the end of it, they actually certified you as someone who could take care of it. They've fallen a bit short, but it's a good class.
Sure, and I want to say they offer that class twice a year, and I don't know what they're doing right now, honestly, with COVID. They used to be in-person classes out at the Comal County facility out off 46, off Resource Drive. So again, I think just trying to expand folks' awareness of that program to get more folks, or build folks' awareness of what it takes to maintain their septic system.
Thanks. I might have missed it already. If you already addressed this, Mark, I was looking into some technical situations keeping us running.
Sure,
here.
go ahead.
But there's a question in the chat from Les Shepard. A significant amount of development in New Braunfels occurs actually outside the immediate city limits. How do you coordinate your efforts with the county, and are there things that we could do that we could help to better facilitate this process?
Good question, and hi, Les. That's a tough question. Certainly there are certain things we do coordinate with Comal County, and I mentioned a few of those in my presentation, but largely, our efforts remain within the jurisdictional boundaries, within the ETJ and the city limits of New Braunfels. Certainly the dry Comal Creek for sure. I mean, we benefit from watershed protection and improvements out in the dry Comal Creek watershed. So I think certainly the city is open to any kind of partnerships to kind of help promote watershed protection out in the dry Comal Creek, and certainly through the Watershed Protection Plan. those other stakeholders that do have jurisdictional control, Comal County or any other folks out in the dry Comal Creek watershed outside of the city limits, they are included within the watershed protection plan, so they can take advantage of any grant funding within that program to kind of help move forward some of these watershed protection measures that I mentioned.
Kind of tied on to that, I have a question for you, Mark.
Sure.
What is the value or role or benefits of land conservation when it comes to water quality and quantity protection, watershed protection?
Sure. It can be hard to quantify, I guess, but I mean, my understanding and I think it's one of the best tools in the toolkit for protecting water quality and habitat. Especially in an area that's like ours, it's becoming rapidly urbanized. I think preservation of land is huge for water quality value, but also for flood protection and also recreation interests. So, and I know this group is keen on kind of those, those reasons for protecting our, and conserving land. So I definitely, support this group and any partnerships that this group or any other groups can have, with the city and protecting land, even if it might be outside of the city limits, because again, everything flows downhill or downstream. So certainly benefits out in the watershed. Land conservation would provide a benefit to the waterways in New Braunfels.
Is that something that you have I don't know if you have a sense of this, but do you have a sense of whether or not protecting land outside of the city limits is something that the city government at large has an appetite for?
I think I don't want to speak for our council members or our mayor or anyone else. I think plenty of folks, if they have awareness of watershed protection, I would say they certainly are interested and have the appetite. As you all know, it comes down to dollars. How is it going to be funded? So I think that's the big question. I think that, again, I don't want to speak for our council members or mayor or folks at the city, but, I think anybody's interested if they understand the value in it in protecting, lands for conservation and water quality protection. It's just, trying to find the dollars to do that. Whether that's through a bond that the voters would have to approve. But, I think the best way to move forward is, these public-private partnerships, and even the city, I mentioned the city seeking out grant funding and other funding sources to try to bring some dollars to the table that could maybe be matched, maybe by some private interest to try to help purchase land. Because as you all know, land in our area is just going up. And so, that's kind of how I see the path forward, at this point, at least. The city's certainly growing and has a lot of other priorities, to fund dollars or allocate dollars for within the city. So I'd say it's important, but there's a lot of other priorities out there now. So just, finding the dollars to do so, and certainly any partnerships I think would help. And we're trying to develop those partnerships and look for outside sources of funding to help, fund conservation.
Thanks, Mark. I see Jack's hand. We've run over time considerably, so thank you for your time. Maybe as we get towards wrapping up here, anybody who does not receive communications from CCCA but wants to receive those, I know we have some guests in the room. We'd invite you to put your email in the chat, or you can direct message it to me or to Elizabeth into the chat. So that we can add you to the email list. That's pretty straightforward. And in the meantime, Jack, go ahead. Oh, you just took yourself off of mute, Jack.
I'm sorry.
There you go. There you go.
What you said bonds, that reminded me. Hays County just had an election in November where they did raise bonds. And I think they set a good example for New Braunfels. I mean, the city of San Marcos is similar in many ways. They have their springs, we have our springs. But I don't see the appetite in Comal County like I do in Hays County. Is there any opportunity there to encourage people here to look more to what's going on in Hayes County and maybe use that as a good example?
Sure. Yeah, and I'm definitely aware. I myself live in Hayes County, so certainly, I went out and voted for that bond and voted in support of it. I will say that I encourage folks to reach out to their neighbors and develop a network of folks who do want to voice in support of conservation and align with kind of the CCCA's mission and goals. And then also, again, reaching out to your, whether it's your county commissioner or if you live in the city, reaching out to your council person or mayor to kind of, let them know where you stand on this issue and that it is an important issue. Certainly there was a recent bond election in New Braunfels. There was a couple open space parks initiative on that initial set of bond projects. And unfortunately, some of those got weeded out. Again, there's a lot of competing interest and competing, programs and initiatives that are out there, public safety, streets, those types of things that are taking priority. And so I think it's a function of the growing pains and, the appetite of not being there to raise taxes and that type of thing. So certainly going forward, again, I would encourage folks to reach out to their county commissioner, their city council member, and their neighbors to try to continue to raise support for kind of the cause of conservation.
Yeah, to underscore that point, and at the risk of stepping on Elizabeth's toes, that is what the CCCA is all about. The Comal County Conservation Alliance is all about. Among other things, demonstrating to our officials, both at the municipal and county level, that there is popular support for publicly funded land conservation, and that there are willing landowners that once they learn about land conservation and that it's a voluntary program, and that they can actually receive some financial value back from it, that there are plenty of willing landowners out there that we could be working with. So that's what the CCCA is about, is demonstrating that, of course, to our officials and engaging the community in that process, and then, supporting our officials however we can as they pursue not just bond strategies, but other strategies for land conservation. Elizabeth, is there anything I said that you'd want to slap my wrist on?
No, you said that beautifully. Thank you. And if there aren't any other questions, that may be a great point to wrap up on.
You're here.
So I will thank everybody for attending. Thank you for putting up with our technical difficulties and for pursuing the links to get in. I thought it was a great presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll continue to support CCCA and tune in next time. Happy 2021, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks.
My
Absolutely,
pleasure.
Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.